Hello, guys.
Hey.
At all.
Hi.
Hi, Dario. Yeah, if there is enough attendance, should we go ahead and start today's discussion? I don't remember anything specific that we did set aside for today's agenda. Is there some pending work item from a pending discussion that we might need to talk about again from the last meeting?
So I've been on the road a lot recently. I wasn't here for the last Federation Working Group meeting, but I am personally working on like setting up an image build. Irfan, you and I were talking about that yesterday.
Yeah.
And I am about like 50% complete on that. I think that I'll have a PR to post later today. And in general, like I would like to get to a point where you can just deploy a federation without having the dependencies that you need to develop it. So I just wanted to let folks know that I'm sitting down and working on stuff like that, or in that area right now.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Paul, for doing that.
Yep.
I'm making good progress on the transition to KubeBuilder. I'd hope to have something posted by this meeting, more likely later today. So I think we're on track as far as that goes.
Maru, would there be anything specific that might be useful for folks like me and Shashi who might want to put their APIs and controllers on top of what you would be building, or it will all be like some proportionally much lesser amount of work?
I mean, as we discussed last week, my goal is getting something in place, like propose a PR, probably work on getting pending work merged, or if for some reason it can't be merged, then coordinating like a rebase on top of it. But the majority of the work is around shifting to CRDs on the testing side. Controller code doesn't really change a lot except for the import to the client. The paths have changed between generated clients for API Server Builder and KubeBuilder. And also in the process of doing this, I've been cleaning up the naming as per conversations we had in the past, so that all the primitive stuff will be in core.federation.k8s.io. The scheduling will be scheduling.federation.k8s.io. So the paths will change as well. But aside from those, are kind of like trivial naming things. So I wouldn't expect this to have dramatic impact on any work that you've done. And it should be easy enough to, I mean, I'm going to do as much of the work as possible. So like Shashi's, DNS work looks close to merging. Once that merges, I'll rebase, pick it up, migrate the APIs, etc. And similar with the work that you have in flight, we'll figure something out to minimize the pain for you.
Cool. That'll be amazing. I observed some failures in the Travis recently, like the tests that failed over there seem to pass locally, but I found failures, many a times I find failures in terms of downloading the artifacts itself. So do you think we need to do something about such flakes, or?
No, I mean, my suspicion is that these are related to the fact that we're downloading resources from stuff that's like localized to Kube infra. And so pulling that from Travis will not be as reliable as it is pulling it from like GCP, like within whatever cluster
within the
Crowd's running
same,
on.
yeah.
So I think it's just kind of something we limp along with for now. If you see it happen, just re-kick the job. And once we transition to test infra, those problems are likely to go away or at least be minimized.
Hopefully, yeah. Okay. Yeah, update from my side is that I have completed the support for deployment and replica set. So in terms of the scheduling of deployment and replica set, if all of my PRs are merged,
Oh,
then
right
we
here is
would
mine.
stand. Hello. Was somebody saying something?
Nolan, can you mute?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so what I was saying is in case there are two outstanding PRs right now, if both of them are merged, then we'll stand on parity with whatever functionality was there in Fed V1 with respect to deployment and replica set. And I have already started trying to put up some scheduler for HPA based scheduling. Um, so getting the HPA API replicated using that sync mechanism is trivial. So that PR I'll probably raise tomorrow. And post that, I would actually be working on getting the parity with respect to the HPA functionality with that existing V1. Yeah, that is it from my side.
I'm hoping that I mean I'm all for kind of just making progress pre-alpha, getting stuff in there. I'm hoping that post-alpha we can look at I mean we just discussed like application boundaries and being able to do scheduling at the application level, because to me like being able to do deployments replica set at HPA individually doesn't necessarily guarantee that your application is going to work, unless you have very tiny isolated applications, which won't always be the case.
So it's probably worth somebody or a set of folks like determining what state like the application CRD that SIGAPS has been working on is in at this point. I think we talked to them a couple months ago, but it's been a little bit, and I haven't been tracking app CRD, so it's probably something someone should look at.
And there's that, and there's also just working in namespace boundaries. But either way, both of those I think could be potentially complementary.
Yeah, another one that like you and I have talked about a little bit, Maru, is like now that we're putting some kind of foundational building blocks in, it's probably time to start thinking about what is the user experience like, and what degree of like glue and experience can we provide over the building blocks that we've built so far, so that things are nice for users.
And that's kind of a nice segue. I don't see Shashi on the call. He's been doing good work on the multi-cluster DNS side. My comment on his PR, which I think is pretty much ready to go, it's LGTM as far as I'm concerned, so anybody else who wants to take a look at it. The caveat being that when I looked at it, I think the user experience could be improved. Like, it's certainly not, I'm not suggesting blocking merge. I think it's fine on its own. It's kind of can be a standalone feature even without federation. But I think there would ideally be a little bit more integration between a federated service and the DNS record, like optionally, but potentially having a field in federated service that had a flag saying, you know, federate DNS or something, and then a controller that would read that and generate the service DNS records that Shashi's implemented a controller for. And then the other part was that there's currently no, actually, Paul, why don't you talk about the cluster name part of your proposal that is not as of yet implemented?
Yeah, so the After reviewing Shashi's PR, I think the one thing that pops out as like something that we can do as a follow-up would be to add and it could be optional, but we could have an optional list of specific clusters that you wanted to target. I think right now, as implemented in the PR, and this is a totally sensible like first iteration on it. I think right now it will target the federated service in all the federated clusters. And we may need to loosen those semantics just a little bit to make it independently usable without federation, or at least more explicit in the API. It's something that we can discuss as a group. I think that Shashi's PR is a great first attempt in additive. I was going to ask Shashi if you were here today, and I'll send him an email or a Slack about this, but I think it would be awesome to see the work that he's done so far, like get a demo of it in this working group. And when I say a demo of it, what I understand that he's put together and gotten to work is the multi-cluster DNS record resource in our project. Then he's got an adapter called Federation DNS that is an adapter between multi-cluster DNS resource and the external DNS source thing that he added to external DNS, which is like basically, I'm sorry, I think it's called a connector in external DNS. So basically, the Federation DNS is an adapter between multi-cluster DNS record resource and external DNS. I think it would be awesome to see all that stuff working. I don't need that to happen before it gets merged. I think there might be like, if I remember, there's probably like one or two or a handful of maybe like minor things that don't block merge that we can also do. But it would be awesome to get a demo next week if Shashi's up for it. But I'll take the action item to talk to him about that and see if he's comfortable with it.
Yeah, I'll also update him, and I think it should be fine. He should be able to give a demo to the working group next week. It should be totally fine. And while you were mentioning about one need of targeting this particular DNS record to specific clusters or the specific list of clusters other than all the clusters which are federated, doesn't that need get satisfied by the placement? Placement basically for services specifies the list of clusters. Or do you mean that different from what placement that is specified on the targeted service? That's what your intention is?
Sorry, could you say that again, Irfan?
Yeah, so while you started, you mentioned that, Maru mentioned that some improvements in the usability of this particular mechanism might be helpful. And then you mentioned that something comes up to your mind that this DNS record could be specific to only particular clusters among the list of federated clusters. So the thought that came to my mind was that this list is sort of available as part of the service placement, right? Is this what you mentioned is something different from that?
Yeah, and I think like if to put a fine point on it, like one thing that like Maru and I had tossed around is like hypothetically, if you, for example, could on a federated service say, I want federated DNS for this. A controller could like automatically create the multi-cluster DNS record resource for you and maintain the like if we have that list of explicit fields, it could maintain the list of clusters for the multi-cluster DNS. But just for like full disclosure and clarity, I don't think there's anything that is like lacking about Shashi's poll. I think it gives us a new Lego, and it gives us an opportunity to then think about like, what are the best ways to use this? What's the best way to make it usable in the context of federation? It's really good.
Yeah.
I think to clarify, I mean, the reason for maybe putting a list of clusters on the service DNS record instead of just using placement is that then DNS can be sort of a self-contained thing that doesn't require placement or the concept of placement if somebody wanted to just use that feature entirely independently.
Okay, yeah, that also makes sense. Well,
can I just clarify something quickly? So one of our goals, high-level goals, certainly at Huawei, was to reach feature parity with V1, and particularly with federated services. So in V1, the way they work is you basically create a service and you say, put it in these clusters, and it does that as well as verifying which of those actually came alive in the sense that the service was reachable and had pods behind it, and then actively manages the DNS records, multiple of them, to make sure that both external and internal DNS lookups go to the right service, to the right actual cluster. And I understood that most of the work that Shashi did was actually a building block towards that end goal. So is that end goal going to be achieved by the end of June, or is that end goal itself in question?
So I don't think the end goal is in question at all. What you've just described, Quentin, I think should be possible to do. So when we've been talking through like make the user experience better, I think what we're talking about is like get to that user experience that you've just described.
Oh,
it's
okay.
Like what I personally had in mind.
Okay, and we, if I understood correctly, we're not going to get there in time for alpha.
I think that is actually doable personally.
Oh, okay.
Because I don't think there's a whole lot of like glue to add between what's in Shashi's PR and the experience that you described, with the caveat that like what we've done so far is external DNS, in the sense of like that was a poor choice to use because there is this project external DNS that is involved, but we still need to talk through the DNS for inside a cluster.
I'm not entirely sure that's the case, and
Yeah.
Shashi would really need to clarify, but when I was reviewing that PR, there was code targeting cluster DNS. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure he's targeting parity with that. I'm just not sure. I'm assuming it's implemented in his personal repo, but we should really just get clarification.
So I think,
Okay.
I believe that the plan was to reuse all the stuff. The cluster DNS stuff was actually implemented in V1, and it's pretty trivial. What it really does is figure out whether the name being looked up looks like a federated service name, and if it does a very slightly different thing than usual, and returns a C name basically, which then propagates out to the external DNS and then may follow a chain of C names until it gets to the actual place it's supposed to go. So the changes to cluster DNS, certainly in V1, and I thought we were planning to just use exactly that in V2, don't require any changes.
So Quentin, I think you've, like, while you were talking, I went out to tape in my brain, and if I remember correctly, the Federation DNS project that's in Shashi's personal repo now, which we should have a discussion as a group about, like do we want to go ahead and donate that to Kubernetes SIGs? If I remember correctly, I think he based that on the Federation V1 DNS stuff. So it's very possible that I've totally been mistaken and that the internal DNS stuff is already in there.
Yeah, I can update a little bit about that. So, so there are three, maybe four, three pieces of this whole functionality. So, Quentin, to answer your question, feature parity with V1 after Shashi's PR merges would, in in all possibilities be there, but there will be different pieces that needs to be put in place together. So what Shashi has, so there are three pieces. So one is, four pieces. So there is one service or federated service, you can say, that is created using the Federation API. Post that, the user has to create the multi-cluster DNS API, so that resource. And there are, apart from that, two more pieces that are needed. So one is the DNS library that you are referring to, Quinton, from Federation V1. So rather than using it from Federation, because if we vendor that from Federation, then we vendor a lot of code, and then Federation of V1 depends on K8s. So there is a hell lot of vendoring nightmare over there. So what Shashi did was just pull out only that package or those packages which belong to this DNS provider library. So there are three providers in that, AWS, Azure, and GCE. So that is what exists in Shashi's repo right now. And I think there is an active controller also that he runs to be able to query these or use these libs. And the fourth piece is the external DNS provider, which actually creates, in this case, the fourth piece is not there. So this library itself is sufficient to create the DNS records against a given DNS server. So this much gives the parity with V1. So if a user creates a service and creates a DNS, multi-cluster DNS resource in Federation, and this library is also included as part of Shashi's controller, then the DNS records would be created as and when the service shards basically come and go into the federated clusters. If a cluster is not healthy, then the shard will be removed from the DNS server. If it's healthy, then it will be put back again.
Sure, fine. Can I repeat to you in my own words what I think you said and see if I have the right understanding?
Yep.
So like, I think what you said is that the Federation DNS project, which is also the adapter between multi-cluster DNS and multi-cluster DNS record and the external DNS project, it also has an active controller that programs cluster DNS for the internal stuff that V1 did. Is that generally accurate?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
And I have one possibility of 1% of error because I literally did not see that. This is like probably a month's ago discussion with Shashi. So he can rectify if there is a mistake in the next meeting. Or I can look at the code and update you again.
Cool.
So I remember one or two comments you guys, Maru and Shashi, had some points on, which is about utilizing some functionality from the K8s in cluster, the kubedns that we are talking about. So there is some federation specific functionality over there that's to do with the naming scheme. So that functionality also is required to have this correct resolution for the names.
Yeah, that's the stuff I was describing earlier, to be clear.
Yeah, so that functionality still remains inside kubedns, Quinton, and we sort of try to use the same naming scheme. So currently, as far as I understand, Shashi is using the DNS library, which is in his repo, and probably, it wouldn't be too much of an effort or work to rather use external DNS to do this creation of records. And he did not go with external DNS because there were some issues that, as far as I remember, there were some issues that crept in. He tried to push in some PRs over there, but whatever functionality he was trying to put in there, it was not complete. Like it was blocked on some, I don't clearly remember what, but it was blocked on some outstanding PR, which was like outstanding from a year or so, and no active work happening on that.
Okay, yeah, I just want to very briefly clarify, because I think we're talking past each other to some extent. There is a DNS server in each Kubernetes cluster, and it receives DNS queries from the containers and it replies.
Correct.
And it has some custom code in it which says, if the name that is being looked up is a federated service name, do something slightly different.
That's
And
correct.
that is completely independent of external DNS and completely independent of the DNS provider library and completely independent of everything else we've spoken about.
There is slight dependency, which is while joining the clusters to federation, that kubedns expects one update in its config. So kubedns basically can pick up config dynamically.
Yes, it gets told what the pattern for
Federation name and that kind of stuff is.
But it doesn't actually, there's no code. I see what you're saying. We just flip a switch on the DNS server in the cluster to say, do the stuff for federated names. Yeah, gotcha.
Correct.
And that's in kubedns, right?
Correct.
And so, interesting. Okay.
So that's how the cross-cluster federated service discovery works. So local service discovery works on some naming scheme, right? Similar, so this federated naming scheme is sort of an extension to that local naming scheme, where rather than 5 dots, there are some more dots and that kind of stuff is there. I mean, I can't can't clearly explain that right now because I don't have the whole naming scheme at the top of my head, but if needed, next meeting we can have a longer discussion about it.
So that's kind of the state of the art today. I would expect that maybe in addition, but there's a potential for this sort of cross-cluster service discovery to rely on something like Istio-based or service mesh-based. I'm not saying that we don't need this today, but there certainly was a lot of interest at KubeCon for integrating Istio for this kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And conversely, there's been a lot of pushback against the current federated services because they require that you expose an external service on your cluster. And all of the balancing actually, like if you go between clusters, it by definition goes out of the one cluster and back into the other cluster via an external IP address. And not everybody wants that. Some people want essentially internal cross-cluster service discovery.
Like they want something where you might have like an SDN that is created by like Istio or something like that just connects you directly to the service in the other cluster without
exactly
the way you described. Yeah.
Details TBD, but basically, so the two big objections are one, relying on reprogramming DNS to change traffic routes, because there's essentially a 180-second potential latency plus a whole bunch of buggy DNS caches, etc., out there that make it not fast enough to respond to failures. And secondly, you have to expose these things externally to the big wide world, and not everybody wants to do that.
So it seems like getting parity with the V1 behavior is like a really sensible first step. It does sound like maybe as a second step after alpha, we should talk about like how would we realize these use cases. And I think if I understand correctly, by the nature of the use case, this is only a use case that's inside one cluster to another communication, right?
The current one actually works both ways. So it does, V1 does both. It does.
Well, yeah, but as far as the service mesh in cluster to in cluster communication is intrinsically in cluster, right?
Yes, I think so. I think the proposal would be to make it cross cluster, to use Istio to route between clusters using a VPN, for example.
Yeah. I think we're saying the same thing.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
The other kind of closely related thing is that we had federated ingress in V1, which did L7 proper load balancing for GCP. But I think there's a general interest in cross-cluster ingress across multiple clouds. I think step one being like it should work. If all your clusters are in a cloud other than Google, you would want that to work. And then the next step beyond that is if your clusters are in different clouds, you still want an ingress that works across them. And obviously it gets progressively more difficult as you go up that stack. Right now it modulo some bugs in the ingress controller. It actually kind of works fine as long as all your clusters are Google clusters. But I think there's a requirement because the ingress exposes an IP address, basically, not a DNS name. So there's no way to like revector stuff. So you have to have a global IP address, which most of the clouds don't have. So the next step would be to make it work better with other clouds that don't have global IP addresses.
Is there like in terms of like from the Huawei side, Quentin, like do you have like a prioritized list of cloud providers that you're interested in making this work correctly with?
Not like an internally like blessed list, but I can tell you Amazon would be near the top.
Yeah.
And Microsoft would be the next one, and plus of course our own one. But those would be the other two. Obviously.
Gotcha. I don't have internally blessed prioritized lists either, but I would say like the big three cloud providers are probably at the top, and then as a close fourth, like your appliance here.
Yeah, that is probably even more important than some of the public clouds. Is the on-premise OpenStack,
the hybrid cloud story.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the most important one for Huawei actually is the on-premise use case.
Yeah, there's certainly, those would be the top four. The precise ordering of those four is, does on-premise come above AWS? I'm not sure. And the problem is on-premise is like a much more diverse set of things, because do you have F5s? Like what load balancers? Do you use the native OpenStack load balancers, or do you have your own hardware ones and all of that sort of stuff? So I would be inclined, if we were to take on like generalizing this outside of Google Cloud, I think our first step should be to, in parallel, do AWS and OpenStack. And I guess that would probably align quite well with Red Hat as well, I'm guessing. Simply because I think once we've cracked that, then the rest of the dominoes fall pretty easily after that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. This reminds me, there is a project that is a Heptio project that has elements of what we've just talked through for load balancing between OpenStack and Kubernetes clusters. That is in the ingress functional area. I will try to dig up a link to that right now, but it sounds at least like functionally relevant.
Oh, and just to be clear, I wasn't talking about load balancing between Kubernetes and OpenStack. I was talking about load balancing between Kubernetes on AWS, Kubernetes on OpenStack, and Kubernetes on any other cloud for that matter.
I see what you mean. Okay. It still might be a relevant link. I'll find it and drop it in the chat, but I see what you mean, Quentin.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any other point we might want to talk about today?
Irfan, just an update from my end. I've been working on validation I've been working on a validation admission server for Federation V2. This is going to be primarily for the move to CRDs. Basically, the scaffolding for that is done. It's basically at the point where we can start adding some validation steps inside of the appropriate hook function in the code. So it's just kind of working in my own private repo right now. Not private, but my own personal repo on GitHub.
Cool. Good to hear that, Ivan. Like I was worrying that there would be, like when we do this move, we might have to implement some stuff from scratch ourselves. Good that you're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. I had one other brief question stroke discussion topic, if there's nothing else on the agenda. Should I go for it?
Go for it.
Please.
So one of the things we left behind when we went from V1 to V2 is Kubernetes API compatibility. And I think it was the right thing to do, and we did it for very reasonable reasons. But one of the compromises that introduces is, we were speaking earlier, I think you mentioned it, Paul, that we want to, or maybe it was Maru, we want to deploy like the entire application. We don't want to have to like mess around with all the little bits individually. So things like Helm obviously would be able to do stuff like that, but Helm relies on a Kubernetes API, and so we can't use Helm. So we can, either go and build our own Helm, which doesn't seem necessarily like the right thing to do, or we could provide a layer on top of V2, which looks maybe not, I think by definition it can't look exactly like the Kubernetes API, but it could look so close to the Kubernetes API that Helm would almost work. And then we could, contribute a module to Helm to make it like Federation capable. So I was just wondering, what kind of, if anybody else has given thoughts to similar stuff and what kind of appetite there might be for doing that. And the same applies to UIs and, basically any piece of automation that relies on a Kubernetes API. We used to provide, Helm would have kind of worked before, and now it doesn't. And I think it would be good to get back to where we were by hook or by crook, where we can at least with a straight face say, with minor changes to your tool, you can make it deploy stuff into the Federation.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. So I think that for Federation ultimately to be usable for people, we have to give them some way to like take your Helm chart, target Federation.
Yeah.
There's a couple different ways we could think about doing that, and they might be things that like make sense to do multiple things depending on the use case. I've thought about, for example, every like a bunch of different things in the spectrum of like at one end having something that looks that is literally the same endpoint that like translates to federated versions of things, to a tool that you can run on something that is YAML-like that will actually transform the resources, to individual tools like Helm. I would love to see an integration between Helm and Federation so that you could like install a chart targeting Federation, and that like and you would have your resources transformed for you if you hadn't done them already. So that you could like, for example, take a Helm chart that doesn't know anything about Federation, deploy it to Federation, have the resources transformed for you on the fly into the federated variants, and maybe also get like placement or overrides generated for you, something like that. But I think Quentin, I'm just really riffing off the like. The fundamental idea of like we have to make it possible to, with as little work as possible, target Federation. I'm 100% on board with that.
Yeah, so maybe once we've got alpha out the door, we should block off one of these sessions as a kind of brainstorming, just to figure out what the options are and pros and cons and get the process started, and then we can crank out maybe a design doc or something and tackle that as part of the next phase. It seems like one of the bigger features that we will want to have in soon after alpha.
Yeah, and it's probably like there's probably baby steps that we can take that enable that for specific tools like Helm, for example, that are maybe easier initial steps to take than a universal solution. But yeah, I think that's super, super important to the success of this project.
Yeah, I mean, there's one fairly simple universal solution that may be relatively little work and lots of value, which is just to essentially take the V1 API, promote all of the things that were annotations into top level fields and create a CRD that looks like that. And then, and all of those top level fields could even be optional in the sense, so a tool could just work against that new API, modulo, CRD kind or whatever it is that'll change, but all the fields will be identical except for these additional optional ones. And then if those tools make small modifications to add those additional fields, then everything just works. And under the hood, we then translate that thing into all of the various pieces of Federation V2 bits that need to be generated to make that thing happen. I'm not saying that's the only way or the best way, but it seems like a pretty super duper easy and general purpose solution without having to build something specific to Helm or specific to all these different things.
Yeah. I'm going to create an issue for this while we're thinking about it, and then also an issue for unwinding a few conversational beats back, like the gaps between what we get after Shashi's DNS PR and V1 parity, as long as we're talking about it. I'll do those now so I don't forget.
Cool.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, but as far as I understand from what I've seen and spoken to Shashi and Irfan, we should have feature parity with V1 95% by alpha.
Sweet.
Yeah, this also points me to one more point. Shashi has raised this earlier. Paul, would you be able to, I'll ask Shashi to get in touch with you again about this. Would you be able to steer him out to donate that particular repo?
Yes, I am intimately aware of the donation criteria and procedures. I would be very happy to help Shashi on that beautiful journey from his GitHub user to Kubernetes SIGs.
Okay, cool. Thanks a lot. Yep, is there anything else we want to talk, or we can close early today?
That's it for me personally.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.
See you, everybody.